Recording. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Contemporary Issues, and we are back in our classroom in St. Andrew for the first time in 18 months, roughly. And so we are happy to be in person and on Zoom. And we've got 8 people on Zoom now, and about 15 of us may be in the classroom. So we're curious to see how this is going to go. And so I'm Zooming with my laptop just aimed at me, but we are going to have much better new cameras and microphones that the church is installing, but it's not done yet. So we're going to be able to see each other, Zoomers and the in-person. We hope next week that we will be able to do that. So it'll be. Marilyn says she's not sure she wants to be seen by everybody in the classroom. Well. One reason for staying home. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to do a little talk about 9/11 and honor that, since today is 9/12. And then Rev Jerry is going to come join us when he's done, and we're going to talk about how many people will return to church. And there's been a lot of columns online and people saying there are different categories. There are those that you could never keep away from church, and there are those that will stay home for a while, and there are those that'll never come back. And so it'll be an interesting discussion about that. Where do we all fall in that? We're all different. So our usual announcements, if you're on Zoom, please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen. And we are recording. And if you're in person here, don't mute yourself. You just talk whenever you want to. And I will also repeat what you say so the Zoomers can hear us too, because the microphone is right straight in front of me. So this is an experiment to see how it goes. Okay. Let's just talk for a second. How's everybody been? What do you think about being back in the building today? Was it fun? There was the choir and the orchestra, and most people were wearing masks. We're not wearing masks in the room here. We're spaced out pretty good. So just to fill you in on how we're doing there. And I want to welcome with us too. She's visiting. And so that's what we're doing today. Any comments? Anybody want to say whether it was good or awkward to be back in church and back here? Happy? Gail says happy. Orchestra really sounded good. Yeah. In a long time since we've heard that full orchestra sound and choir sound. Yep. Okay. They are. We have a lot of talent. That's right. One rehearsal was all the orchestra had. Very good. Yeah, we were saying that there were some mistakes, but you wouldn't really know it unless you're listening exactly close to it. Right. And Joy says, what exactly does live stream do? Well, you mean as opposed to pre-recorded and people watching and live stream? Yeah, well, the church is going to be live streaming the live service onto the internet, but they're not doing that right now, I understand. So that's the only definition I know. You're just going to be seeing it live as it happens in the service. Yep, you just click on Go St. Andrew live stream.
Does the church have to pay for that broadcasting?
I don't know. That's a good question, Jim. He said, does the church have to pay for that? So they all say, yeah, probably we have to pay for everything. Yeah. So yeah, we'll ask Jerry when he gets here. And Yes, Judy says after the live stream, you can go back and watch the YouTube anytime, of course. So if you miss it on Sunday morning, you can watch it anytime. That's the new tech world, right? Vicky, you're so high tech. Vicky says anybody around the world can watch it. That's right. That's the whole idea of the internet. Right. That's right. Oh, we're the tech challenge generation, aren't we? Yeah, we're going to do a class on that. We'll bring a teenager in and we'll have a good class on that. Okay. All righty. Well, let's talk about 911. Shannon was just telling us on Zoom that she's been watching the PBS shows about that. Have you been watching and reliving all that and the stories that came out of it? Just amazing. And it was a good really look back at it, especially with just the last few weeks getting out of Afghanistan. We've been reminded of all that and what happened afterwards. And that we went into Afghanistan 1 month after the 9/11 attacks. And so what a look back it's been for that. Any thoughts you want to share about watching those on TV? Yes, Vicki.
Well, this isn't about watching those on TV.
Okay.
My sister, had the national
Vicki says her sister had a Homes Association picnic last night.
and the old refused.
And the old board refused to come because they were having the meeting on 9/11 and thought it was disrespectful. So some of the old generation didn't want to do anything on 9/11 because it was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're no, the coverage has been very respectful. I think so too. Well,
a little bit and took me back.
took us back to learn and appreciate that.
Right.
Judy. Mm-hmm.
What are you doing? You're not doing anything. You can't turn the screen.
During Judy said there was a big college football day, of course, but they also stopped and honored 9/11 during the college football coverage, which was good to see. That they didn't just ignore it as though sports was more important. Yeah. Alice says, do we think it's going to become a national holiday? Congress passed something for that. I haven't heard anything about that. Have you? No. You would think so. I guess it's informal Patriots Day, but it's not Veterans Day and President's Day and lots of others. Yeah. Vicky says the schools don't need another day to take off, but would be nice to honor that day. Jerry says the schools have to have so many days so it doesn't affect them. Yeah. Well, let me read a couple of columns that point out some of the best lessons that some of the pundits think they saw that came out of this. An NBC News commentator said there were 10 main lessons that he saw. First one was heroes are everywhere. We saw that many brave and selfless acts came out of the firefighters, the flight attendants, the co-workers, the volunteers, and in so many ways on 9/11 and afterwards. I thought that was a great number one to put. Number two was, he said, we learned we have to protect the cockpit in every plane. Complacency in the cabin was much more before 9/11, of course, than afterwards. They've reinforced the cockpit doors and implemented many more safety procedures. But in the end, it also is up to people in the plane to help if necessary, we've found out, to step up and stop any attempt to breach the cockpit. Number three is, we found out that air travel is more integral to our way of life than we even realized before. Air travel completely ceased on 9/11 and for at least a week after. From mail and cargo transport to business and leisure travel, the entire country was at a standstill for at least a week. We now realize how important air travel is to our everyday life as a nation. And if you want to stop and make a comment, anybody here, jump in as I'm doing this. Sure, Terry. Depoliticized our intelligence. How so, Terry? Says Terry says the individual branches of intelligence were very protective of their own intelligence, didn't share it. But afterwards, that changed.
I'm not so sure about what he's talking about.
And the president had his own agenda. So Terry's saying that the Bush and the intelligence services were focused elsewhere in the world, and now we're really focused on terrorism.
It's interesting that you would say that, because I heard that on one of the broadcasts yesterday, and I'm very interested to know that there was information out there
Yeah, a lot.
prior to that.
He said we didn't all realize that there were warnings before 9/11, and just the intelligence didn't get to the president, wasn't acted on.
He says things that sound like he knows it all. I mean, he doesn't say.
I know you all on Zoom can't hear, but I'll repeat for you. Hang with me. Terry Terwilliger says that a lot of things that weren't known back then have been, and some have been classified information, are going to start being declassified, and we'll see more about what the Saudis really knew about what was planned, and how our intelligence didn't follow up on things they should have. So there'll be lessons learned from that too. Another one on this list is that we learned how vulnerable America is. Terrorism, we thought, wouldn't come to our shores. We thought it was, and it was mostly abroad. So that was the real shock of 9/11. And another one is that how it brought the country together in a feeling that we must not let terrorists win. After we recovered from the shock of 9/11, we realized that we weren't going to hide or change our open society, that we would just carry on and try to do the best we can while still combating terrorism in a more effective way. And one of those was airport security. Another lesson was we saw how lax it was before 9/11. And there's much disagreement about whether air travel is safer now. A lot of people still think terrorists can get through, but the fact is that we can joke about TSA not being effective, but it's much better than it was. And I see that too when I travel. Don't you also see it? It looks like we are doing more.
Concerning intelligence, there was a lady in Minnesota who gave some crucial information about terrorism to the FBI, and they ignored her. And then there was another person with the airport that reported that these fellows wanted to learn to fly. They didn't want to learn to take off or land. They just wanted to learn how to fly. And she reported that as being kind of strange, and nobody paid attention to that either.
Yep. Did you all hear that Jim said it was
Yeah.
that there were people didn't care how to land, they just want to know how to steer the airplane. So that was a tip off too. Yep. Jerry says he was in naval intelligence when he was in the service and learned a lot about how much we don't know as general citizens. There's so much that's not shared with us. So going to be important lessons still to come as time goes on. And Terry says a big issue for now and the future is how is the U.S. going to stop drone attacks by other countries and terrorists that are going to launch them from inside the U.S. Yeah, how do we learn to identify and stop that? Yeah, we can't tell everybody how they're going to use their drones, right? There will be drones delivering pizza and everything else in the future. And so which one of them are going to be bad drones and which ones will be good and which ones will be bad pizza? Good point, Terry. More security with cell towers. All the ones. Yep, it's a lot going on. Another couple lessons from an NPR commentator said, here's 3 lessons that they saw. Number one was that the U.S. really has weakened the terrorist networks more than we know. In the wake of 9/11, there was universal fear that we would be hit again by more attacks. But of course, that hasn't happened to this degree. There was one shooting in 2019 by a Saudi aviation student, and we've had homegrown Muslim extremists that have killed 100 Americans in several things, but they've not been linked to terrorist networks. They've been individual acts. Did that. And so the United States was insulated from the recurrence of a 9/11 attack because of bin Laden's decision to carry out the operation significantly increased the size, power, and funding of the U.S. national security state. So the whole Homeland Security Department that was put in place, and much more than we know, our intelligence and ability to know what's going on with the terrorist networks has grown so much more. It was obviously we're taking it more seriously than we did before 9/11.
Our oldest son works for a company that has developed hundreds of satellites.
Uh-huh.
Satellites the size of a shoebox.
Really?
So
Alice says her son works for a company that's put many satellites up, and they're much more advanced than they were in the past. Jerry, come over here.
Ron also had a top secret. And he and Adam get together. and
Great,
like,
thank you.
uh,
Top secret clearance.
but,
Yeah.
You know, it gives me a feeling of confidence to know that that generation is involved in this kind of stuff.
Yes, yes.
Smart, on top of what's going on. It's just very
Mhm.
I know Adam is very involved in helping the next generation and grandchildren
Mhm.
coming up, so I don't worry. I don't stay awake
Alice says
at night
she
thinking
doesn't
about it.
worry so much because her son is one of those that's fighting terrorism by putting up reconnaissance satellites, and he has high security clearance. So we've got a lot of folks who are attached. Jerry, welcome. We are on Zoom and in person, and we're just kind of winging it to see how we do here. I'm repeating back so Shannon and others can hear what they're saying. And you know her, this lady here. Yeah. And so how'd it go with the service? Good.
Good job.
Great. Yeah, we were saying that too. So, and I was explaining to them that we're doing kind of the Zooming old school here, but we will have cameras and microphones, and we'll be hopefully much more high tech, maybe even next week. Does that sound right? Or 2 weeks? I know you're not in charge of it. Outside his pay grade, he says. But as soon as we can, but that will be neat so that the Zoomers can see everybody in class too. That'll be good. The other side will have our own laptops and screens on the wall. It'll be neat. We were just sharing about 9/11, just thinking about that. A lot of people watched on TV the replay of everything and the lessons learned. One of the other things on this NPR lesson column that someone wrote was that we really have learned that the U.S. mission in Afghanistan and Iraq were never as clearly defined as they should have been. That we thought as time went on, we knew that we were no longer fighting Al Qaeda that just did the attack, but we were also trying to establish democracies in those two countries, and it just didn't work because the people were not ready for it. It couldn't support it, and we have that whole discussion going on still about, is that our function? Should we be trying to establish democracies when countries are not ready for it or not willing to fight for it? So any thoughts there? Gail says it goes with trust.
Not
How the whole culture is set up,
right,
whether
right.
they're
I
not
mean,
thinking
how-
about democracy
how
in many
people are
cases.
brought up.
Hmm? Yeah. Gail says people, are they brought up in a violent society that's not ready to change that? Just so many factors here. Whole foreign policy. Harry says one of our generals made a comment. Terry says one of our generals said yesterday we should have had our people trained to fight like the Taliban did. They were more effective in their strategy than we were.
Steve, I have a comment about the readiness for these various countries around democracy. I think that the Arab Spring was a true reflection of an interest and an appetite to have a more open society in a number of different countries.
Yeah, Susan said the Arab Spring that was really active before, especially in Egypt, right before 9/11, made us think that everybody in the Mideast wanted democracy and was ready for it, but turned out not to be the case. It was a minority of young people that really were pushing for that. I believe we learned at the time, and found it was much harder when we get in there to try and set up and maintain a democracy. Yeah. So those were the main things. And one other final thing I found was another lesson is that school kids are mean. That Muslim kids really continued, Muslim students across America continued to be harassed around 9/11. And one writer did a survey of 55 Muslim students in the greater Washington area, and it found that more than 50% of them said they are teased and harassed by kids every year at 9/11. That kids make jokes to them about "don't blow us up," or "don't kill us, you terrorist people," mean things like that. And that administrators often don't stop that. The administrators say things like, "It's not a big deal, just let it roll off you," instead of trying to correct that kind of harassment of Muslim kids. And so that's something that administrators are trying to pay attention to. Sad. Where do they hear that, Vicky said? You mean at home, maybe? Uh-huh. Social media, sure. Yeah, but it's just sad to see that continuing. Sure, Lola, go ahead.
This is something that more Americans 9/11. I happened to be in Europe on that day.
Oh, Lola was in Europe on that day.
Belgium, Belgium, experiencing how continues.
Mhm.
And after it happened, we couldn't come home, we couldn't even call.
Says they couldn't call home. It shut things down there too. Couldn't fly back.
And we were, as we went to
She said as Americans, tourists, they got a lot of support from people in those countries, Austria, Belgium.
in Austria,
So there were church services and a lot of support for America, and telling the Americans how sorry they were. We remember how much support there was all around the world. Okay. Okay, well, it is 11:05 roughly, and second half, I wanted to talk about church. And so I'm glad Jerry can join us, because I want to ask Jerry, who does he think is going to come back to church? And you make a prediction too. So, but let me share with you first that there are all kinds of predictions out there on the internet by pastors and demographers, and everybody saying that there are three main types of people that are churchgoers. Those that you can't keep away, and they're going to come back for anything. Those that are going to be slow to come back because they're concerned about the pandemic still going on. And those that are not going to come back, that they're going to love staying home in their pajamas and watching, and they just have lost the connection to church. And how are churches supposed to react to that? So an AP story I had here, I'll just quote a little bit from it. Pew Research survey this last summer found that 92% of people who regularly attend religious services expect to continue at the same rate that they have, whereas 7% said that they are going to come back less often, that they like the Zoom format, and that they want to do that. It's more convenient for them. And that the pandemic was the last straw for a lot of small and old congregations, especially like the 164-year-old Waldboro United Methodist Church on the coast of Maine. It had 100 members, but it dipped to 25 during the pandemic and then to 10. So they finally said this was the last straw for our old church. We had to close. And that happened all across the country. And it just was an exacerbation of the decades-long drop in people who identify as religious and are going to services too. So it was a momentum thing that just was the last straw for a lot of little things, a lot of little churches. But here are 6 reasons that this writer said he thinks that people may not be coming to church. So I'll just mention these and then let's discuss. One is COVID hesitancy, of course. The Delta variant is wreaking havoc on many communities and is keeping lots of us away from normalcy, of course. Number 2 is inertia. Inertia means the symptom of inactivity or sluggishness that will continue. Property that is at rest will stay at rest. So a lot of people will not continue. For some churchgoers, COVID was the force that disrupted the velocity of their lives, and they'll just stay where they're at. Number 3 is weak attachment. Many churchgoers didn't have a strong attachment before. And for those churches who didn't keep that attachment by Zooming or inviting, doing other things during the pandemic, just lost those people. Number 4 was church switching. Some people who were overly eager to get back to church didn't wait for their churches to open and they switched to others. And finally, no added value. Some churchgoers, of course, don't see their church as reaching out and adding value to them during the pandemic. So they think, well, why should I continue with that church? So lots of different degrees of attachment. So now I'm going to move my screen closer to Jerry and put him on the spot and ask him what he thinks. So, what do you think, Jerry? Loud and right.
I've studied it a little bit and have thought about it. I also have to admit that when it comes to church growth and the life of the church, that numbers have never really been a thing for me. I've lived my life in the corporate world for 30 years, thinking vertically. Everything was better if it was up. And when I moved into the ministry and started to acclimate to the life of the church, I quickly realized that that's not the way to do things. That what I think the church is here to do is to move people horizontally. It's to move people from one spot to this spot. And whether that's 10 or whether that's 10,000, it really doesn't matter to me. I think the research that Steve quotes is interesting. I hope all of you took note that it's a very small percentage of people who are going to be sedentary and want to Zoom. 7% is not a lot when you compare it to 92. And so I think that there will always be that corner of the population that feels comfortable doing that. And, you know, of course, things like COVID hesitancy and things like that, you know, those things are going to be with us for a while. But I also like to remind people that this isn't the first plague that the church has dealt with. You know, in the early 13th and 14th and 15th centuries, the church dealt with a lot of sickness and disease that was global. And especially around Europe, where you had entire communities that were devastated, and the church survived. The church survived, and so I have the utmost hope that the church will survive this. So yeah, you know, I'm hopeful that it'll be a slow burn, and of course there'll be people that kind of move off to the margins and do things their own way. But I'm pretty hopeful that the core group of people will come back. I think the bigger question for the church and the culture that it's finding itself in is, what do we do once we get back? Because we're not circulating in the world that we used to live in anymore, on a number of levels, right? There was a lot of stuff going on before the pandemic, and that stuff didn't go away. It just got put on hold for a while. And I don't mean that in our denomination. I mean that culturally as a society. And I also think too that the pandemic revealed some things that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. I always like to tell people that still waters run deep, but you can't see the bottom, right? You know what I mean? Sometimes you got to get in there and you got to stir the water up to kind of bring all that stuff to the surface so you can see what's underneath. And I think that's what the pandemic did for the church. I think it awakened us to realize that some of the old ways are the good ways, and it awakened us to see some needs that we weren't paying attention to. And so I think if we approach it like that as an opportunity, again, you know, the church will thrive. I think I think what a lot of people realized is through the 70s and 80s, and especially into the 90s, it was probably bigger in the 70s. You know, there's this sense of growing individualism. You know, the boomer generation, I mean, let's face it, that's the me generation, right? That's the generation that did a bunch of stuff, right? They won battles, they stopped a violent war, they went to the moon, they did all these things, right? And what came from that, right, is this really rampant sense of individualism. And individualism was rampant in our society through the 80s and 90s, and it's still really with us today. And what that bred was this sense of isolation, is we feel like, you know, it's all about me and I can take care of me, right? You take care of you and I'll take care of me. And, you know, that's fine and dandy, right? But the thing that the COVID brought out is that we really just don't function well that way. When we were forced into our homes, and I mean forced into our homes because of a pandemic, and we literally could not leave the house, when we could not go to the grocery store, when we could not come to church, when we couldn't even be around people, right? Over time, what that did is it caused us to realize that maybe this individualism thing isn't the way this works. Maybe there is something to being with other people, right? Whether that's on Zoom or whether that's in person. Maybe it helps us realize that we do need each other and that we're going to have to find new ways to make that happen. Because let's face it, I mean, the world we live in today is this or that. It's black or white. It's you're with me or you're against me. There's very little discussion in the middle. I read a wonderful book by a guy named Os Guinness. It's called The Loss of Civility. And Os Guinness argued 30 years ago in this book, 20, 30 years ago, that if Western democracy was going to fall and fail, it wouldn't be because of a war. It wouldn't be any kind of strife or anything like that. It would be the loss of civility, the loss of people to come together in a room and to civilly debate different points of view.
Oh, we're seeing
That was 20 something odd years ago. Os Guinness wrote that, right? And so talk about being a futurist, right? I mean, he saw this coming. And, you know, and I would argue that in a lot of ways that's where we're at.
Yeah.
You know, that we've reached this point. And so, you know, how the question that I always ask is how does the church facilitate and move into that environment and try to restore these relationships? Because for me, my whole theology, I have to tell you, the theology I constructed in seminary and that I try to live by is a theology of relationships. I think that this whole faith thing from beginning to end, from Genesis to Revelation, right, is about restoration and reconciliation. It is about taking what God made and making it whole, right? And you know, even Mark today mentioned this, right? And Ecclesiastes, when you talk about all these things in your life, right? 28 seasons in life, the goal is what? Wholeness, restoration. And so, you know, how does the church move into the society where we're at, learn from what's happened in the past 18 months to try to see the needs that are there and try to bring a sense of restoration and reconciliation and wholeness again? Because I would gather that every single one of you in this room feels a sense of brokenness still. I mean, we're getting back to normal. We're all happy to be here, right? But you're going to go home and say, well, that just isn't what it used to be, right? And my argument is, well, maybe it shouldn't be, but how do we get back to something new that feels whole again, right? It may not look and taste the same, but it'll be whole and it'll be fresh and it'll be reviving. You know what I mean? So I think that's the challenge. I do. And I mean, look, you want to know who I think is coming back to church? Would y'all go to church today? That place was packed. You know what I mean? So no, I'm not cynical. I think that we're on a trajectory, and I think that people need the church. I think that the world needs the church, and I'm hopeful about the future. But I think it's up to us. So
Well said. Could you all hear Jerry okay?
Yes.
Good. Okay, good. I was trying to get the laptop right in front of you. Well, what do you all think? Zoomers and folks here in class. Are you optimistic everybody will return? Well, at St. Andrew, it seems like we have a big core group that really does want to come so much. And there are those on the periphery, of course, come and go, but we've got an awful lot that are dedicated to this church. Okay, Terry.
Zooming is okay, temporarily.
Huh?
But I think Christians forget a basic thing about Christianity, and that's fellowship. Jesus said, where one or two gather in my name, there am I also. We forget fellowship. I think Christianity would die out if it wasn't for Christians getting together.
Heard
And
Jim say he thought Christianity would die out except for getting together. Yeah.
yeah, yes,
Zoom's okay temporarily.
it would, it's great to go out and be in awe and worship God's creation. But that doesn't speak to you like a fellowship of like-minded Christians.
Mhm.
You need fellowship. Jane and I we're Zoomers right now, and we're going to be Zoomers for a little bit yet. But we know the importance of gathering together with our friends and fellow Christians. It stimulates us to Christian action, to practice your Christianity. Whereas,
Well said, Jim.
thank you.
Good. Terry, you were going to say something, and then Judy. Terry said young people are moving from the country to cities. And churches are making that move with them, applying new technology. Yep.
So the only reason and done in suburbs, cities of America, because we're willing to.
Yeah. Terry said we have to be open to using Zoom and other technologies and help young people connect that way first.
But it usually not.
Yeah. A lot of people won't come to church that we can reach on Zoom. Yeah, agree. Judy.
I'm interested in your book about civility.
Yeah.
Because I think as a coach,
Jim,
more like you had to say about black and white.
Judy said she liked the book Jerry said about civility. So we can come back and do.
I grew up in a Baptist church. All right. So, things are very black and white in Baptist church. Fact was you were all sinners and you were all damned to hell. And, if you didn't take Jesus into your heart, that you're going down. I don't disparage the Baptist church. Okay. There's all kinds of Baptist churches out there. Don't generalize. Right. But the ones I grew up in were very Southern, very fundamental. And I don't disparage them because one thing that they taught me two things. And I like to say this because I don't want people to think I'm picking on Baptist. I'm not. They taught me a sense of urgency about my faith. that this is not something to put off. You need to do this right now and take it seriously. And they taught me a love of scripture, right? And as Methodists, we don't really tend to do that a lot. You know what I mean? At least not now. We did in Wesley's day, but not so much now. And so, you know, I love that. But what I'll say is that I think part of the problem with our polarity, and especially within the church, is look, we might not like to admit it, but we like black and white. We like to be told this is right and this is wrong. When people read the Bible, they like to be told this is what it means, right? They wanted this or that. They want it either or. What I've learned over the 53 years of my life, and especially in the last 20 years, is that interpretations of scripture, different interpretations of scripture, can exist at the same time, and that's okay. That's not detrimental. That what Alice reads and what I read is the same text, but what Alice gets from it and interprets from it may be vastly different from mine. And the only thing that seminary teaches you is how to sit down and have a conversation about that in a rational way. It doesn't teach you anything fancy. It just gives you some tools to do the best you can to remove bias and your subjective interpretation out, and to look at things as objectively as possible, never 100%, but as best you can, and to sit down and talk about why you think that and why I think that. Right? It's okay, and it's okay for us even if we don't agree, right? You know, even if we don't agree. And I think that that's, you know, that kind of want for this or that, I think that's just bled its way into everything, whether it's politics or, I mean, even music. I mean, oh my gosh, you like country music? Yeah, you know what I mean? But it's everything, right? Like we want to be told, you know what I mean? Like, and you know, and I don't think, and I think that's something that we need to realize about ourselves, because we want that because it provides a sense of stability and security for us. It does. It really does. So.
I think we're shouting, I don't want to say, but that was all.
Judy's saying we don't do much critical thinking anymore, it seems.
And it seems in our
Mhm.
culture, in all, and we know how to form our opinion. Skill and how to work together.
Nobody's really teaching us how to look at both sides and work together. Yeah.
There was a show on the History Channel. It's called Vikings. It's on the History Channel. God, we love this show. My wife's probably smiling right now. Well, and my son, he's almost 16, and he's got a mind for history. He's got kind of an aptitude for history. So he loves these shows, right? And so we're watching this show, and we're watching, if you've ever watched this show, the show is basically about a farmer initially, and his name is Ragnarok, and Ragnar, he comes from this farmer thing to becoming a king, and it's all about his journey into becoming a king of the Vikings, right? Or his little area. And my wife, I'll never forget what she said to him. She said, "Why is Ragnar so powerful? Like, what's special about Ragnar that separates him from everybody?" And my son's like, I don't know. And she goes, "He's intellectually curious, and he's open to changing his mind." And it's funny because in the show, what he does is the first time that they make the journey across the ocean and they come to the British Kingdom, the first thing that they see is a monastery. And of course, you know, they're Vikings, so don't judge them, but you know, they ransack the monastery. There's a lot of, you know, violence and stuff, but he takes a prisoner, one of the monks, hostage, and he makes him his servant. But over time, what you see happening is this friendship developing between Athanasius and Ragnar, and they form this like intimate bond, right? And it's amazing to me, you know. And this monk taught him everything about the world and about the differences that Ragnar had no idea about. And but I always think of that: be intellectually curious and be open to changing your mind. I think those are two really critical thinking. I think that's it in a nutshell. Yeah.
Judy said, we all know people we don't get in conversations with about politics and religion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why we're. They have a big vaccine issues that they can't.
And the vaccination discussions today too. Yeah.
We also the news stories. But I mean, look, am I going to sit here and am I going to start judging Valor and the whole institution and saying they're all the devil, right? You know, you're wrong. I mean, I don't agree with them. And of course, whenever a theology moves beyond the point of reasonableness and actually does intentional harm, well, then we've got a discussion to have, right? Like we got to talk about that. And we got to come out against that. But what fascinates me is what would I do if my kids here, and I call them my kids because this is my church now. What if our kids are sitting across at Wingstop at lunch, across from a Valor kid that starts spewing this stuff? How do we want them to respond? Right? And how are we going to teach them how to respond? How are we going to respond? Right to that? Is it just going to devolve into name calling and you're this and that, you're going down and I'm going up and all this garbage? Because that's just not constructive, right? We've got to find ways to reasonably engage one another. And for me, what it is, and my beloved wife has taught me this more than anybody else. She's on the call. I'm giving you full credit, by the way. I hope you know that. No, what she's taught me to do is she says that I have to get out of my own space, right? If I'm going to understand where people are coming from, then the conversations I'm going to have are going to be me asking them questions. Well, you know, like, well, where did you get that from? Why do you believe that? Oh, by the way, what's your favorite color? Yellow? I'm just kidding. Right. But you know what I mean? Like you have to teach yourself how to ask questions where the other people feels like you're genuinely interested in what they have to say, not because you want to judge them, but because you're trying to understand them. Right? I mean, look, I learned this 25 years ago when I took that silly Stephen Covey course, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? Right. Like habit number 3, seek to be understood and not to understand, or seek to understand and not to be understood. I mean, he said it way back then, and it's the same rule. And so, but now in the 21st century, right? And, you know, September of 2021, that's a pretty challenging goal to aspire to. But I guarantee you, if you don't create instances of cognitive dissonance in people, they're never going to change. And that's not on them, that's on you. And so whatever problems the church is having, those are our problems. It's not their problem, right, in that conversation. And I think that's the challenge that we face now.
Jerry said, we've got two ears for a reason and one mouth for a reason.
Yeah, one mouth is clear.
Well, we're at 11:30. We need to wrap up. Go ahead, Terry. Terry said he always tries to help his grandkids think outside the box. So I'm trying to be a good grandparent. Not easy to think outside the box. I think that's what our church tries to do. Out of the box, get us all out of our boxes. Huh? Okay, Vicky's going to do the last comment.
I think that why people don't outside the box and why they want to stay.
Vicky says she doesn't think thinks people do not think outside the box because they're fearful. It's a personal fear or a bigger fear. What if I backslide and I'm thinking wrong? Yeah. Yeah. What if I go to the dark side? Very good. Well, thank you, everybody. Good discussion today. Zoomers, thank you for your patience. I know you couldn't hear everybody well, and I tried to relay it to you. Hopefully next week we can do a much better job and everybody can see everybody. All righty, thank you. God bless everybody here and our country and our world. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
whatever.